April 1st, 1993. And we're going to find out some things about Mom. She's going to tell us about her past and how things were as she was growing up. Go ahead, Mom.
Okay. Kelly has got something to ask. She's sitting here asking me some questions. Okay, Kelly?
I would like to know about the medication in 1918.
Okay, back in those days, doctors used to come to the house. And at that period of time, the World War I had just ended, and the boys were all coming home. And when they did, there was this terrible flu epidemic that had come home from World War I. They had it over there in Europe, and when the boys came home, they brought it to America. And everybody was getting it. All the children were getting it, and it was terrible. It was the most terrible influenza that in an intestinal way. And at that time, when you would go to have a bowel movement, it would be blood, and it was very frightening and it was just death was all it was everywhere. And I had quite a few little playmates in the neighborhood. I was just a little tiny girl. I was only about I guess about 3.5. And I got it. I don't know where I caught it from, but I got it. And all these other little kids got it too. And when the doctor came to my house, my grandma was the one I lived with at that time because my mother was working. And they told her, don't give her anything to eat. Not anything at all. Just give her castor oil. And that was the most terrible tasting stuff you ever got in your mouth. Horrible, thick, kind of oily stuff, and it just about killed you. Just about kill you off every time you put it in your mouth. But that's what I lived on for, I don't know, probably a week or more, or maybe 2 weeks, because I had this, it was so bad, and all of my little friends in the neighborhood died. I was the only one that lived. And that was because my grandma really followed the doctor's orders. When she found out how these other children were dying because their mother fed them, she couldn't stand it to have them crying for food. And he told my grandmother, he says, now don't give her anything, no matter how much she cries for food, just don't feed her, because that'll save her life. And so my grandma, she'd come in and she'd, fix me up in the bed and take care of me. And she'd cry because I'd cry, I wanted something to eat, and she didn't dare give it to me, only that miserable castor oil. And so anyway, then all of this blood began to cease. And after that stopped, why then they began to give me a little bit of food. But before that, she always kept the doors shut tight so that the smell of food would not get back to the bedroom where I was. And so anyway, that was the greatest medicine that if anybody had any stomach ache, they had castor oil. If they had a fever, they got castor oil. It seemed to be the thing that they just gave in that time. And that was the way that was.
I wanted to tell something. Well, what did the castor oil look like?
The castor oil? It was a real thick, kind of a light yellow, just like your Mazola oil or something like that. You know what color the oil is that Mama uses to cook with? Well, it's that color. Only it was a lot thicker, kind of a heavy oil, real heavy, kind of a yellowish color. And so that was the way it was, and it was awful hard to swallow because it had a bad taste too. They don't use it anymore. They give you pills. I haven't heard of castor oil in a good many years. Okay.
How did you feel about adapting from oil lamps to electricity in 1923?
Well, that was great. Boy, we could really see. It lit the whole room up. And it was just an old bulb, and the cord was come down the middle of the room, And then they had a light, this big old light, this light bulb on the end of it, and you turn a little, kind of like a little handle thing on the side, a little switch, and that would turn it on. But all those old oil lamps, they were the dirtiest things. Everybody had to clean those lamps every day so that you could see a little, pretty good. But it was just nothing. You know how it is to sit with a candle? Well, it was just the oil lamps were just a wee bit brighter than the candles were. And then when they came in with the electricity, oh boy, was everybody happy and glad we could have real light.
Do you feel that it made your waking hours and bedtime hours change?
Yes, we stayed up longer. We did, because we could, we could sit there and read. Of course, we didn't. Now remember, we didn't have all this modern stuff in those days. We had nothing to listen to, only just talk to each other, and we were very much to read. So we read a lot of books. So I was a great reader. I loved to read, and I started reading. As soon as I learned to read, I just kept going to the library and getting books and always reading all the time. I loved it, and still do.
Well, speaking of modern technology, how did you feel about the telephone in 1925?
Well, that was very exciting. We could go, and when you took the receiver down, you see they was kind of a box-shaped thing, kind of long and narrow, and then it had the speaker part, that you talked into. It stuck out, and then it had the receiver hung in a little hook on the side. Well, when you take that receiver down and put it up to your ear, you'd hear this voice say, "Central, number please." And so then you'd tell the number that you wanted to call, and she would connect you with whoever it was you were calling. And I can still remember what our phone number was. It was 5744. I never will forget that, because it was quite an exciting time, and my Aunt Marguerite had a phone, and we could talk to her and to a lot of other different people. So it was a great way of communicating that we had never been able to do before. Of course, now the telephone was in much earlier than that, but that was my remembrance of it at that particular time.
I want to say something. Well, how much did they have to clean on those?
On those lamps? Well, they were all black inside, black soot. And you get your finger in that and get it on your face, well, you just look terrible. And they were real black, and you'd have to put them down in the hot water and suds and clean them, and then dry them just like you dry dishes. And it was like clear glass. That's the way it was.
What about the switch from kerosene stoves to gas?
Well, that was great, because really kerosene was very dangerous. It was a liquid like black gasoline is, but it was kerosene. And they had kind of like a little tank along the edge of the stove, and that was full of this. And then you'd have to light a match to start it. Well, boy, you had to make mighty sure that there wasn't any of this kerosene on top of it, it had to be cleaned, because otherwise it'd catch on fire, and the way everything goes. But then finally they brought the gas lines down through the town, and out into the country. We were out in what they called the country then, because there wasn't very many houses between us and the town. And so anyway, it was quite a changeover, especially my grandma. She was the one who did the cooking, and she really enjoyed that gas stove, because she had her oven was run by the gas, and before that, things just weren't up to par. They just had to make shift on a lot of things.
And talking about stoves, could you tell us about the hot dog at the beach?
That was when I was just a little girl. I guess I was about like Seth here, around pretty close to 5. And my mama kept telling me that she was going to take me down to the beach. We used to go to the beach every once in a while with some friends of hers. And she kept telling me she was going to take me down to the beach and she was going to buy me a hot dog. Well, at that age, we had never called them hot dogs. They were always wieners. And I thought, in my mind, I figured it was some kind of part of a dog, and I was not going to eat any dog, for sure. And so, anyway, we got down to the beach, and we went down the pike at Long Beach, and they had all kinds of carnival things and everything, and these vendors were out with their hot dogs and their peanuts and their popcorn and all that stuff. And here we walked up this. Mom says, "Now I'm going to get you a hot dog." And I was kind of pulling back, you know how a kid will when you don't want something in your mouth, and you're just scared to death. You have to eat something you don't want. And she says, "Come on now." And so I walked over with her, and here was these, what they call hot dogs. Well, they were bigger around than the wieners were that we were used to, and a little shorter, but they fit in a bun. And I thought, "Mama, that's a wiener." She laughed. She thought she pulled a good one on me. But boy, I was really scared about that dog business.
Could you tell us about the switch to indoor toilets?
Oh my, yes. We used to everybody had these outdoor toilets. They called them privies some of the time. And they usually were a little house, a little building that was made with a sort of a slanted roof, and then they built the sides on them with like redwood, 1x12s, redwood boards, and they left an opening between at the top between the roof and the sides, you know, so the roof hung over so rain didn't come in, but it left a vent around it so that it was well vented. And then you went in there, and they had a little bench-like thing about yay wide, and there was 2 holes that were made, and so you could go in there and go to the potty. And they always had lime, a bag of lime in there, so that you could sprinkle it down after you had gone. You'd sprinkle this lime down there, and that just took away any odors and kept it sanitary. And also, they did not have toilet paper in those days. They had, people would use their big old Sears Roebuck catalogs, which were about as big as our big old telephone books are today. And that paper was not exactly kosher, but anyway, we used it. We knew nothing about any other kind. So that's what we used. So one day, my mother had, she worked, and she was beginning to see the bathrooms that were being put into the houses. And they call them bathrooms because also they had a bathtub. And that was another thing. In the early days, we didn't have bathtubs. We just used the old wash tub that our grandmothers and all of them used to wash clothes in. And they'd have the big one. It was about this big around and maybe about yay deep. And then they put the water in there, and on Saturday night you got your bath. You got in there and they filled it up pretty close so that when you got into it, it didn't overflow. And then you took your, washed you, and I happened to be the youngest, the littlest, and so I got the first bath, clean water, thank you. Anyway, then she was seeing these bathrooms, so she thought she'd like to do something about it. So she talked to my grandpa. So they began to think, well, maybe it'd be a good idea. So anyway, they went to work, and I can remember when the men came and began building on a room at the end of the house, right off of my mother's bedroom. My mother and I slept together because there wasn't 3 bedrooms in that house. And so anyway, they put this all in, and they came with this nice tub, and then you had a little sink that you could wash your hands in, and then they had this toilet, which had water down in it, like our modern toilets today. They haven't really changed very much. And some of those in the beginning had a big tank up at the top that you had from the ceiling down, and you'd pull a chain, and then that had water in it, and it would go down pipes, and it would flush it. But then they gradually came around to where they had them like you see them today, with a little tank right connected to the toilet. And at that time, too, was when toilet paper began to be made. And they had the rolls like you have, like we see today and have in our bathrooms. And it was an altogether different kind of paper. It's much better today, but it was so much better than catalog paper. So that was the way they had the modern bathroom came in.
Hey, I want to tell something.
Yeah, what do you want to add?
How about Lego paper?
Radio paper.
What? Regular.
What?
Regular.
Oh, regular paper. No, see, when they made those toilets, you can't take a piece of paper like you got here on the magazine or newspaper and go put it in the toilet. You'll get it all plugged up. It won't work. It's got to be a soft paper so that when you flush it, it goes down and it doesn't clog all the pipes and everything up. Okay? Understand that?
Yeah.
So, what do you want to tell?
Well, why didn't they use this other kind of paper? How about this kind of paper? Painting paper.
No, see, it was too hard. It had to be real soft like our toilet paper is today to make it go down. You know, when you go in and flush the toilet, you know, that has to go down, and that when you flush it, the water swishes it down and out of the toilet.
Oh, how about that?
So that was the way it was. So you had to have that one kind or it wouldn't work. So that's why we still have it today.
Okay, would you explain to us what crystal sets were and how you felt about the change to a radio in 1929?
Well, we did not have a crystal set, but a lot of people did. The younger people, a lot of them had them. And we heard about it, and oh, it was exciting to hear that for the first time that you could hear people talking from quite some distance away. And you just turn it was run by batteries. And I don't know this stuff. It looked crystal color, and I guess it was crystal. That's what they used. And so that was where the radio first started. And it would pick up these voices from distant, not too distant, but distance from where they were. And you could get people singing and people playing instruments and that sort of thing. And then they would communicate back and forth. Something like your, what did your dad used to have? Where you talk to different people.
Ham radio.
A what?
Amateur radio.
No,
Ham radio.
you didn't call it that. What was it that you used to talk to different people here? Not too long ago you were doing that.
CB radio.
No. Where you learned all the different,
Ham radio.
ham radio, that was it, ham radio. It was something on that order, where you could talk, of course, this, the ham, you can go a lot further. But then the radio came in, and everybody began buying a radio, and of course they were in a little box-shaped thing, and had all the little dial on it, and oh boy, you could turn it up, hook it up to the electricity. You didn't have to be bothered with batteries anymore. You could have it play all day long. And then that's when gradually they became more advanced in it, and it began where you could hear programs from way back east, clear to California, where I lived, and it was very interesting. And everybody used to sit around the radio at night and listen to stories and different things like that. You know, that they good programs that they would put on, singing, and it was really great.
You talk about long distance. Tell us about the train ride to Wisconsin.
Well, that was quite an event in my early days. I went with my grandmother, had two sons, my Uncle Jim and my Uncle Bert. They lived back in Beloit, Wisconsin. And Uncle Jim was a fireman, and his wife's name was she was my Aunt Minnie, and she is still alive today. She's 96 years old, and she still writes to me, and her handwriting is very good. You don't have any problem at all with her penmanship. And she writes rather interesting little letters to me. And then my Uncle Bert, he had his wife's name was Pearl, and he had two daughters, Teresa and Dorothy. And they lived out on a farm, and I had never been on a farm in my life because I live in California, and we had a very, a little farm more like of fruit and vegetables, and mostly fruit and berries that Grandpa sold. And so I had never been around horses or cattle of any kind, and pigs and all that stuff, so it was a great thrill to me to go there to my Uncle Bert's, and they had a big old barn way off away from the house, and he loved to wrestle. And so he had some of his friends, they'd come out, and they had a great big rug with padding underneath it, and they'd go out in the barn and they'd wrestle. And so his daughter and I, Teresa, she and I were close to the same age. Well, and in those days, the little girls would wear black bloomers. And so we'd go out in there, and of course we wanted to be just like Uncle Bert, so we were still little girls, so we'd just have our bloomers on. We found out we weren't supposed to do that one day when we got caught. Anyway, we'd wrestle around on the floor, and just roll and tumble, and we had a wonderful time. But they had, and Dorothy, she was a little bit younger than we were, and they had a bunch of geese. So one day we went out into the yard, and these geese, they're kind of mean sometimes. And this old goose, I guess we got in her way some way or another, and boy, she come tearing after Dorothy, and nipped her in her little buttocks, right? Oh, she screamed. Oh, it hurt. It was terrible. And anyway, it scared us all half to death. We stayed away from the geese from that time on as much as we dared to. And then they had pigs, and we used to go down by the creek. They had a creek that ran down through their place, and that's where the cows and the horses and the pigs all go down there to drink. And we'd go down and play in that creek, and first thing you know, one day we were playing in there, and I felt something grab a hold of my leg and kind of pinch on it, and it hurt. Looked down, here was a great big old crab. These old feelers that come out, they can pinch, let me tell you. So anyway, we did that. We played down there, and then we went over and would fool around with the pigs as much as we could. And but the way I got back there was on a train, and I'd never ridden a train before. And so anyway, my grandma told me that we were going to have to cross the Great Salt Lake. Well, there again I got petrified. I thought we was going to go down in that train and we'd go way down into the water, because I was only about eight, maybe almost 9. And boy, I was real worried because I didn't know how to swim. And finally we got up there in Utah and started across this Great Salt Lake on this big old, and that was a choo-choo train. It wasn't one of your modern trains like you have today. It was the old kind that goes just chug, chug, chug along, the smoke going up out of it, and the old whistle blow and everything. And so anyway, she said, well, we're at the Salt Lake now. Oh, petrified. And all of a sudden the train started going out, and I looked out and I could see water on each side of us. Well, that track went right across the top of it. It was all built up. But I didn't know that was going to be that way. But she did. And so she got a big kick out of teasing me. I got teased every once in a while about things that really made me feel pretty funny. But anyway, we had a wonderful time back there. And my Uncle Jim was a fireman. And he was a big old fire chief. Well, he worked there, and I think he was the chief for a while. And he'd take me down there and put me up on those big fire trucks, And it was real interesting and new to me, nothing that I'd ever seen before. And while we were there, maybe I'll go into a few things while we were there that you might be interested in. That, as I have told you kids, that your great-great-grandfather was Solomon Juneau, and he was the founder of Milwaukee, and so they took us over to Madison, which is the capital of Wisconsin. And in there, in this It's where they keep all these, they had his carriage in there, and they had his,
Museum?
yeah, museum, that's the word I'm trying to remember. They had his carriage and his lanterns that he used, and quite a number of things. There's some of the things that they used around these carriages, you know, they were all, everything that they had back in those early days. Well, it was quite interesting to see all of those things. So, anyway, I just thought I'd toss that in, and then I had my first fishing experience there too. And we went out to my grandmother's brother's home, whose name was Lou. And he had a big old farm out there, he and Aunt Lizzie. And they had a big creek run down through their place. But there was another place that we went, and it was a lake. And in Wisconsin, you've got many rivers and lakes. It's very large. And so when we got over there, why they wanted to go on a fishing trip and had to this lake, and they had all the family, all his kids, and everybody else that was relatives all came. And while they took a big old wash tub, and we went out there and went fishing. Well, I had never caught a fish, I'd never been fishing in my life. So my dear little uncle, he came out and he began showing me, giving me a little rod, you know, a bamboo stick with a string and a pin on the end that was hooked, and put a worm on it for me, and I threw that out in the water. Well, they had fish that they called bullfish there, and they were pretty good size, about that long, good pan-fried fish, you know, about that long, about yay big around, and they had a funny-looking face. They called them. That's why they called them a bullfish, because it looked like that. And so we got that whole wash tub full of fish. But the first one that I pulled out, thought I was getting a whale. You know, it's little, and anything get on your line that feels big to you first time. Flipped that thing out, and it went up in a tree behind me. And we just had quite a time getting my first fish out of the tree. And so anyway, that was part of my great experiences. A lot of firsts here on that trip, let me tell you. So anyway, we got back to California, and I had gained some weight. My mother nearly died when she saw me, because I was quite skinny when I was young, back in the olden days. And she says, "What happened to her?" And Grandma says, "I guess it was too much cream out on the and rich food back there on those farms with all that real butter and cream and all that stuff." So anyway, that was the end of that. Now what?
What about the silent movies in the 1930s to talkies?
Oh, that was exciting, because we had always, whenever we went to the movies, it was always done a lot of action, and then they put the words across the bottom of the screen. When they would talk, you know, well, then it would be put on there what they were saying. And, well, that was very exciting for that time, but boy, let me tell you, when they come out with all these people talking, and we didn't have to read all that stuff all the time. Sometimes they'd flash it on, and it would get, it would be too fast, and you didn't get every word that was said. But anyway, then they found that out, and they learned how to have. Well, they had music a lot. There'd be somebody that would play, and you'd have this music background. But
They played the piano,
yeah, they played the piano.
and you'd watch the movie on the screen.
Yeah, watch the movie with the writing underneath it. But then when we went in then, and all of a sudden the actors began to talk. Oh, that was so exciting. We just wanted to go to the show all the time then, because it was really something, that was really great to us. So that was the way that was.
So to go to the movies, you had to be educated.
Yes, you did. Or else somebody'd have to tell you what was being said, and that was a little difficult, because they didn't allow any monkey business in theaters, everybody had to be quiet. In those days, people had more respect. They thought about the other guy that was in there. And if you had a bunch of people all talking and everything, which is today's way of doing things, why, nobody hears anything. Everybody's in confusion, and they wonder, well, what really happened? But it was different. We just listened, and everybody was so fascinated with it that it made it more great than ever.
Was the sound in sync pretty well with the movies? Or
Yeah,
was it
they did real well. They really did. It was really great, and they had a lot of. They had some beautiful movies back in those days. They had a lot of singing and they had good stories that were good educational stories as well as historical things and very good pictures. They had one story that I think your kids would love to read, and that was Ramona. And that was that Indian story. I'd like you kids to read that one of these times. Okay. What else now? Well, Joshua's going to ask some questions now. His curiosity is arising.
I like to tell them.
Okay, would you ask another question?
I was going to ask one that you were that I was waiting to ask.
Okay.
Well, why did you whoop it back out of the water instead of just pulling?
Well, see, I didn't have. It was just one line, and it wasn't too terrible long. And so when I took the bamboo pole, I just whoosh, as fast as that's the only way I knew to do was to get it out of the water. See, well, the fish, when I would give it a jerk like that, the fish went off and went up in this tree. They had heavy foliage on the tree, and it got caught up there in that tree.
Well, how did you guys get it down?
Well, the men that were there, my uncles and them, they got up there and got it for me. Put it down, and that was a marked fish because it was my first. Then after we had that, when we got this big bucket, or this big wash tub full of all those fish, we went back to my Uncle Lou's house, and they built a big fire out in the backyard, and we barbecued those fish, and they were the most delicious things you ever ate. We had quite a time. Okay, Joshua.
How was it that washboards to electric washing machines?
Oh, about how we did our washing?
Yeah.
Well, my dear little darling grandma, she had to go out there in the backyard, and they had a sort of a bench out there that my grandpa had built, and she had her great big wash tub, and then she had a couple of smaller ones, and first of all they had what they call boilers, and they were a long kettle, I guess you'd call it. It was about this long and about yay wide. It was oval shape, and it was quite deep, and they would fill that with water and get it boiling hot on the stove in the house, and that's where they would put their white clothes, like their sheets and pillowcases and all that kind of stuff, and they would boil it in this water with the soap that they used. They didn't have this powdered soap like we have to do that today. They had this Fells naphtha bar soap, and Grandma would shave it off and get it to where it was all, it would get kind of jelly-like consistency of like jelly, and then they would shake it around in there till it got suds, see, and then anyway, then they boil these sheets and anything of white clothes, and then they would take it out, and if there was anything on it, she would scrub it on a washboard. Did you ever see a washboard? Okay, you know what those look like then. And that's what they used to go up and down, and those poor women, when they get through with that strong soap and rub it up and down over that metal, I'm telling you, their hands looked like, I don't know what, it was terrible. And then they'd take it out of this big tub where the soap was, and put it over into another a tub to rinse the clothes. And then they had another tub that they filled up with water, and it was cold water, and they put bluing in it.
What's that?
Well, it was a substance that caused your sheets to your white stuff to be very white. It was sort of a, I really don't know what it was. It was something that they still use bluing today in some places, but that's what they called it. And boy, you'd hang those clothes out on the line and they were white. They were just beautiful, like you pour bleach on them.
Did you just go to the store and buy bleach and Tide and Bold and all?
No, they had nothing like that. They had bar soap, big old Fell's naphtha they used to call it.
Lye soap?
And well, it had lye in it, yeah, because and a lot of people made their own soap too, I guess. But Grandma always used that Fell's naphtha.
Could you
And,
use the same kind of soap on your body?
No, you didn't put that on your body.
Daddy.
You would. It would be really a mess if they did. No, it was too strong. That's why their hands got so to where they hurt. So.
What kind of soap did you use for your body?
Well, we had a soap that we'd buy at the store,
Do you remember the name?
and I don't really remember the name of what they used at that time. There was palm olive came in. I can remember that, and ivory soap. And
Procter and Gamble was alive and well back then.
yeah, I guess they probably were. They were coming into existence, or else something like that, and they bought it out or something later, I guess. But anyway, it was really quite an experience. And then when we got through with all that stuff, some dear soul somewhere decided to make an because electricity had come in. They invented an engine and fixed up a wash machine. And so, of course, our wash machines in those days were a lot different than they are today. But it would wash and it would agitate and clean it good. Then it had a wringer across the top. And you'd put your clothes through that wringer and down into some more water to rinse the soap out of it, and same process. But of course today, we've gotten up to here now where we have our the wash water goes in with the soap and all that stuff, and then it goes out, and it automatically,
together.
some more water comes in, and you know how it is today. But that's the way it all started out, and it was a hard job to wash clothes for a family. And then, of course, another thing too, that they didn't have this kind of material like we have today, where it's wash and wear. It was iron everything. So Monday was wash day, Tuesday was ironing, always. And that was the way they were methodical. If you didn't wash, of course, if there was rain or something, you couldn't wash. But it was because we didn't have dryers of any kind. Had to hang the clothes all up on the line. Okay. Got another question?
Yes. How about airplanes in 1927?
Oh, they had airplanes even before that, because they had them during the war. They were starting the World War I, just kind of getting into that. And then they had these little double wings, and there were seats in them, so there could be the pilot in the front seat and another guy in the back. And they would go up, and they always wore goggles and what have you, because it was all open. And they weren't closed in at all, and it would pretty much take your breath away, I imagine, to drive in one of them. And so anyway, there was quite a lot of people were doing flying. A lot of men were becoming aviators. But there was one man who was very interested in aviation, and that was Charles Lindbergh. And he wanted to fly from America to France over the ocean. Well, nobody had ever done this ever before. They'd never started out over the water. And you know, if it crashed, that was the end of you. And so anyway, he had this plane that they built that was more powerful than any we had at the time. And they also it was a one-wing thing, and they called it Spirit of St. Louis. That's what they named it. And so he started out from New York and went to Paris, France, and he actually crossed the ocean. And I mean to tell you that everybody in the whole world was so excited over that. And I can remember that I was downtown in Pomona. I was just a young girl, a very young girl yet. And as I was walking along the street, I heard all the people begin to say, "Lucky Lindy, he's made it, a Lucky Lindy." And so everybody was so excited, I'm telling you. It's all anybody could talk about and think that. And France was rejoicing that we had gotten across that ocean and in their land, you know. And so everybody everywhere that had any communication lines of any kind all knew about it. And that was a great, thrilling thing, that we were the first from the United States.
I'd like to know something. Like you were talking, they wore the goggles. Why did they wear the hats? You know.
Well, they had to have something on their head too. It was sort of it would just fit down over their head, and these goggles would stay on better. Because they had to have things that held down, and if their hair would go down on their face or anything, they couldn't have anything to distract them. It had to be where they could see wherever they were going, what they were doing. Okay.
How about automobiles in 1915?
Well, they started out with Henry Ford. He was an inventor of the automobile, and they used to call it a Model T Ford, and it was one of those kind of little cars. They called them Tin Lizzies a lot of the time, and they were little open cars, and they called them a touring car because they had two seats, and then they had a windshield, and across the top of that, they over the top they had a covering of some kind of material. I guess it was leather they used in those days, because we didn't have vinyl or anything like that then. And so they would make the top of that, and at the very back, on the back side as it came down, it came straight across, and then down in the back to the top of the seats. And in the back they had a window, what they called it, they put some kind of stuff in there they called isinglass, and it was a yellowish color stuff. But it would stand wind and rain and that sort of thing. And the same way they had side curtains, they called them. Whenever it would rain, they'd clip these on the sides, so you were pretty well protected inside this car. So that was the way that was, and that was the way it went on for quite some time, until they began, of course, other companies besides Ford began making cars, and then there was the Chevrolet came in, and then the Chrysler and the Plymouth and all of these other cars eventually all came in, and each time it was improved. Okay.
How about Grandma and Papa Cook being?
Well, I told you once before, the last time we made one of these, I told you how that Grandma, the cook, was a widow, and she worked in the packing house, and of course I was their only child. So along about in 1929, around in there, she met Papa Cook. She met him at the packing house where she worked. He was her girlfriend's brother, and he was out here from Minnesota, as they used to call it, and he was working there in the packing house, and she told her girlfriend one day, she says, "You see that guy standing over there?" She says, "I'd sure like to meet him." And her girlfriend began to laugh. She says, "Well, what are you laughing at?" She says, "Well, that's my brother." So anyway, she introduced them, and they started going together, and they went together for quite a little while, and then finally one day he popped the question, and he liked me, and I was getting to be a big girl. I was 15 when they got married, so I was practically grown up. Anyway, they got married, and we moved away from my dear little grandma and grandpa's place up to another place in Pomona. And I went to school at that time. I started was in junior high.
Could you tell us what time you moved away from your grandparents?
Yeah, that was 1930, July 1930. Yeah. No, you got any more?
Yeah. Are there any interesting presidents that were interesting to you that you remember?
Yes, well, a lot of them were good presidents, but two outstanding ones were when Franklin Roosevelt came in. He came in when the Depression was at the very worst, and he had a lot of new ideas, and he started what they call the WPA, and it was a public works thing, and it gave everybody a job, and the government would give each state a certain amount of money, and these people would work, and that's the way they began to build back to where they could do things. And your grandpa, Bob, my husband, he worked on that, and they built the big fairgrounds out there in Pomona, the great big exhibit buildings, and they built all of that with this WPA work. And then, of course, then things began to build up, but he used to have, what I admired about him was that he showed an interest in the people, because every week he would have what they called a fireside chat, and he would get up and he would tell the people all the way how things were progressing in the United States and all of that, and so it was just really quite. We understood what he was talking about, and we felt sort of safe with him. But of course, during his administration, we also went to war. That was when World War II started. And when all of our ships were, sunk at Pearl Harbor, and it was a very tragic time for our country. But anyway, that put all the people back to work. The men went to war, as I said before, and the women went to work.
Did any sickness?
Oh, there was one more president that things happened, and that was with Jack Kennedy, because he was assassinated, and that was quite a tragic time for our country. But anyway, that was two presidents that were outstanding above the others. So many of them had they were good presidents, but these others came in at very outstanding times to change things.
What kind of recreation did you have as a teenager? Did you have pinball machines and video arcades?
Oh, no.
Bungee jumping?
No. No, we had, mostly as young people, they had dances at the school, the kids, kind of like you do today too. But we also, for our recreation, we'd go to each other's homes and we'd play games that we would have, like bingo stuff and all that kind of things. But we would have parties, and we'd all these little games that were a lot of fun. And so then and then when I started going where I could really go out and go with somebody, and they had a car and all, why, a bunch of us we always went in groups. We didn't go alone too much. We always had a bunch of us, and we seemed like we had a lot more fun that way. And we would go down to the Santa Ana River, and the guys would build a great big bonfire right down by the river, and we would take wieners and buns, or just wieners sometimes, and roast them, and marshmallows, all that good stuff. And then we'd sing, and your grandpa played the ukulele, and he was quite a crooner. And we'd sing, and we'd have a good time down there. And sometimes the river was not very deep. But anyway, we'd take off our shoes and socks and go out and walk up and down that river, and then get out and huddle around the fire because we were freezing. And then we would go home, and that was some of the things that we did. we had a lot of picnics and different stuff like that that everybody seemed to take an interest in, and we'd play ball and all that kind of stuff.
What kind of swimsuits did you wear?
Well, they covered us. We did not have all of this low neck stuff, and we had the girls had little skirts like, you know, that were on them. Many of them do that today. We had that sort of thing, and we were covered. We were not exposed, let me tell you, like the girls are today. Okay.
How was high school, you know?
Oh, I loved school. I loved high school. It was a lot of fun. And we had the Spanish teacher that was just tops. She was, we had more fun in that class because everybody loved it, because she had gone to Mexico when she was young and learning to be a teacher. And she had learned to do the Spanish dances, and she had the castanets, and she had her little flowery things, and it was just, you know, her clothes, skirts, and she'd get up there and dance and do all these little things because she was young. And then she'd have us all, one time she had a breakfast, and we had all Spanish food. It was very exciting. And then, of course, I had a lot of friends in high school, boyfriends, girlfriends, all of this nice little things, you know, that all girls have. And it was fun. Okay, any more?
Before we get, well, you're too old.
Yes.
What did you play with while you were young? What kind of toys did you
Oh,
have?
girl, when I was young, real young, dolls. Everything was dolls. I had more dolls, I think, than anything else. I think a lot of it was the fact that I was an only child, and I loved to. I was always tormenting my mother, telling her I wanted her to go out to the orphanage out there in Laverne and would get us a baby. I wanted a little sister or brother so bad, and she says, "Honey, I can't do that." So I think they pacified me with dolls, and I had every kind of shape of doll you can think of, big ones, little ones, and I used to take the old oatmeal boxes, you know, they were round like they are today even, but they were ones that were about yay long, and cut a deep hole in it, like make a cradle out of it, and I'd cover it. Paper dolls were another thing, and the magazines used to have good-sized paper dolls, and Saturday Evening Post especially, and that would come, and I'd sit and cut those all out and play with those, and then my grandma used to play checkers with me a lot, and just things like that were a lot of fun. So,
How about marriage?
about marriage? Well, finally, one day, there was a boy that came along, and his name was Bob. And I was introduced to him, and one night I was going with another young fellow by the name of Eddie, and he lived down in Chino. And for some reason or other, he was supposed to come and see me that night, and he didn't show up. So my girlfriend and her boyfriend and Bob were out riding, and they decided they were going to come and see if I'd go out with Bob. And he was the one that had the car. So anyway, I said, well, I'm mad at Eddie, he didn't show up. And that's the first time he never had. I don't know what happened to him, but anyway, that night he couldn't come. And he didn't let me know. So anyway, I went out, got in the car, and sat down next to Bob. And of course, he very conveniently had his arm out across the back of the seat, you know. And I had to get up close because these other two had to sit in there. Was a one-seated car, and so Dwayne was the boy, and Lois was the girl. She was my best friend at that time. And she had to sit on his lap. So away we went, and we went down to the old airport in South Pomona, climbed up on a bunch of great big bales of hay, real high up, and we climbed up there, and we were sitting down looking at all the countryside, watching the stars and waiting for a little plane to come in, you know. And so I was looking up at all these stars and everything, and he was pointing out this one and pointing out that one, you know. And he says, now see up there? And so I turned like this to see up there, and he kissed me. Well, of course it was a big thrill, but I didn't let him know it was. Oh, that was funny.
Was it your first
So
kiss?
I never got rid of him. He was at my house. He was at my house practically every night. And boy, he knew he better be around because I dumped the other guy. Then Eddie come back and he had a fit. He wanted to go with me some more. And oh, he was so upset. I guess he really did love me. I didn't know that. Anyway, he was a real good guy, real sweet. So anyway, of course, then, you know, eventually, a year or so later, we got married. I got old enough to, and out of high school, then I could get married. So he used to come and pick me up at school once in a while, or take me if it was a bad day and raining and everything. And he worked down the street for this Ole Nugent, so he was only a block away. And he used to come by and see me, and that's where he had first seen me. Was out in the yard there, in the backyard. When he drove by, he saw me, and I don't know what he thought what he fell for, to tell you the truth. But anyway, he wanted to meet me so bad, and then he found out that his boyfriend, one of his boyfriends, was going with Lois, and she was my friend, and that's the way it all happened. And so we got married, and then we moved to San Dimas. And then we had 4 boys. And we had them so far apart and in between, every which way, but anyway, we loved them all.
In 1938, you got reconsecrated to the Lord and filled with the Holy Spirit.
Yes, in 1938. Bob and I had both been brought up in Christian homes, but we really, you know, we loved the Lord, but we didn't understand Him. You know, it was just, we knew about Jesus and we'd accepted Him, that He was our Savior and all that, and asked Him to forgive us. But we were both children when we did this. And so then in 1938, Jimmy was just a little boy. He was only about 2.5 years old or 3. And we went down to the Angelus Temple with John and Ruby. And while we were down there, while we were introduced to the real power of God, and through Amy Semple McPherson, she was the pastor at that time, and we happened to see a young woman was being baptized in water, and when she came up out of the water, she was filled with the Holy Spirit. Well, we had never seen anything like that before, but it put such a hunger. I knew it was real. You know, it was just real to me, and I guess the Lord was really working overtime on both of us. And so when they got through the sermon that night, well, we went down and reconsecrated our lives to the Lord, and said we repented of all of our foolish ways and sinful lives and the sins that we may have omitted and committed and all that, and accepted the Lord. And we started in going. Well, Bob's sister Mary, she had met some people, and they had introduced her to the Holy Spirit, and so she told us about it, and of course that excited us more than ever because we'd seen somebody receive it. So anyway, we kept going to the little Assembly of God church there in Pomona, where Mary went, and they had a revival, and this was in November of 1938. On the 9th of November was the night or the day that I received the Holy Spirit, and so did Aunt Ruby, and then that night your grandpa received it, and my other sister-in-law Jean, she's been in heaven now for quite some time. But anyway, the 4 of us all received it, and then the others in the family began to receive it as we went along. But it was, and then we had a little bit of bad news from one part of the family. Aunt Eva, she was a Anderson, Indiana Church of God was the name of the church she went to. And they all believed that talking in tongues was absolutely of the devil. And she was just having a fit because she'd been to their Bible college and she was she knew all there was to know about the Bible. And so we kind of got excommunicated a time or two. But, it was funny. Whenever anything would happen that was kind of upsetting to them, they'd call and ask us to pray. And I thought that was so funny. If we were full of the devil that talks in tongues, what in the world did they want us to pray for? Oh well, but she finally accepted it. She never received it, but she accepted that it wasn't of the devil anymore.
Could you tell us about World War II in 1941?
Yes, your Uncle Bill was a baby, and when he was about September to December, we had Pearl Harbor. And that was starting of that, and then I think I told you before about Uncle Delmer and Uncle Versal being off to war together. I think I told you in that other part, and so you can remember that. Yeah. And so it was sad times. Everybody was very upset all the time over so many boys getting killed, because really it was almost two wars. You see, there was a war in Europe with Germany. That was when Hitler was doing all his thing in Europe, and then Japan come and attacked at us, and so we had a bunch of our boys in the Pacific and a bunch of them over in the Atlantic, and so there wasn't too many men left at home. Most all of them were anybody that was of an age for war, and then the young guys that were coming on and growing up, and a lot of them lied about their age and went in before they were 18. And so anyway, it was sad times and a lot of grief. But anyway, the Lord brought us through and gave victory, and there was an awful lot of prayer. That's when the people in America prayed. And when you have a praying nation and a praying president that really love the Lord, why things happen for your country, and that's the way the Lord did. Okay.
How about Space Age, the man that walked on the moon in 1961?
Yeah, well, they did that, but at the end of this World War II, I wanted to tell you that we have what we went into as the atomic age, and that's when they dropped the atomic bomb over there in Hiroshima and Nagasaki, and that ended World War II. And so then, anyway, that was what they did. The space age came in, and then now, what are we in now? What's the age today? What are they doing now? We've got the computer age, I guess you call it, huh? So I don't know anything about that. I see them.
We've got the age of revelation.
Well, definitely, we are living in the very last hours of this age, and we know that our Lord Jesus Christ is about to make his return. And we're happily looking forward for him to come. And we all cry out, come quickly, Lord Jesus. And now you're just going to have to wait another 5 years before Ma can... And I don't know what's going to happen then, but I'm hoping that we're all in the millennium.
Amen.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye-bye.